After a violent storm exposed a hidden staircase beneath the Smoky Mountains, a team of historians entered an underground world that shouldn't exist. What they discovered below terrified soldiers, awakened ancient creatures, and uncovered a secret buried for centuries. But the deeper they searched, the more they realized something beneath the mountain was waking up. Welcome to Dark Lantern Story. Tonight we travel deep into mystery, forgotten history, and secrets buried beneath the earth. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time you are listening to this story. If you enjoy dark historical mysteries like this one, subscribe to Dark Lantern Story and leave a like to support the channel. Now turn down the lights, listen closely, and step into the shadows with us. The people of Bryson Hollow had always feared the mountains. The Smoky Mountains rose like giant sleeping beasts around the small Appalachian town, covered in endless forests, heavy mist, and ancient silence. During the day, the mountains looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But at night they changed into something darker. Strange sounds echoed through the valleys after sunset. Hunters spoke of footsteps following them through the woods. Travelers vanished on old mountain roads. Elderly people in Bryson Hollow whispered stories about hidden caves, lost miners, and voices that came from beneath the earth itself. Most people laughed at those stories. Historians called them mountain legends. Scientists dismissed them as superstition. But in the autumn of 2023, something was discovered beneath those mountains that forced everyone to question what they believed. It began with a violent storm that lasted 3 nights. Rain hammered the mountains without stopping. Rivers overflowed and landslides tore through the forests. On the 4th morning, the storm finally ended. Thick fog covered the valleys while rescue teams searched for damaged roads and missing hikers. Sheriff Elias Boone stood near the collapsed side of Raven Ridge Road, staring at the destruction. Elias was a tall man in his late 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent almost his entire life in Bryson Hollow. He knew every trail, every creek, and every old story about the Smoky Mountains. Beside him stood Dr. Clara Whitmore, a historian from Tennessee State University. Clara had arrived in town 2 weeks earlier to study abandoned mining camps from the 19th century. She was intelligent, curious, and stubborn, qualities that often got her into trouble. A construction worker approached them nervously. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you need to see this." Elias followed the worker toward the edge of the collapsed road. Clara walked beside him carefully. The landslide had ripped away an entire section of the mountainside. Broken trees hung from the mud like snapped bones. At first, Elias thought he was looking at an ordinary cave entrance exposed by the storm, but then he saw the stone staircase. It disappeared deep underground beneath the mountain. The stairs were ancient, carved from dark stone unlike anything found in the region. Strange symbols covered the walls around the entrance. Clara froze instantly. Her face turned pale with shock. "That cannot be possible," she whispered. Elias looked at her. "What is it?" Clara stepped closer to the symbols. Her hands trembled as she touched the carvings. "These markings are older than any known settlement in the Smoky Mountains," she said softly. "Much older." The workers refused to go near the entrance. One of them claimed cold air was coming from below, even though the morning was warm. Another swore he heard faint whispers rising from the staircase. Elias ordered everyone back while he radioed for more equipment, but Clara could not stop staring into the darkness below. Something about the place pulled at her mind. It felt wrong, ancient, and strangely alive. By evening, a small investigation team had formed. Sheriff Elias Boone led the group alongside Clara Whitmore, Deputy Marcus Hale, geologist Benjamin Carter, and local mountain guide Ruth Lawson. Ruth was nearly 70 years old and knew the mountains better than anyone alive. She rarely spoke unless necessary, but when she saw the staircase, her expression changed immediately. "You should leave this place alone," she warned quietly. Elias frowned. "Why?" Ruth stared at the cave entrance with fear in her eyes. "Because my grandfather told me stories about what sleeps beneath these mountains." Nobody answered her. The team entered the cave the next morning. Floodlights illuminated the staircase as they descended carefully into the darkness. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Water dripped from the stone ceiling while their footsteps echoed endlessly below. Clara noticed something disturbing after several minutes. "These stairs are perfectly preserved," she said. "There should be erosion, cracks, something." Benjamin ran his hand along the wall. "This stone is unlike anything I have ever seen. It almost feels polished." After descending nearly 200 steps, they finally reached the bottom. Everyone stopped moving. An enormous underground chamber stretched before them. Massive pillars carved with symbols supported the ceiling high above. Ancient statues lined the walls. At the center of the chamber stood a giant circular stone door covered in metallic markings. Deputy Marcus let out a nervous laugh. "What in God's name is this place?" Clara slowly approached one of the statues. It depicted a tall figure wearing robes with hollow eyes and hands stretched toward the sky. "This should not exist," she whispered again. Ruth Lawson refused to step farther into the chamber. "We need to leave now," she said firmly. Elias sighed impatiently. Ruth calmed down. "You do not understand," she snapped. "The Cherokee elders spoke about a hidden place beneath the mountains, a place where people vanished long before white settlers arrived." Benjamin shook his head. "Legends are not evidence." Ruth stared at him coldly. "And yet, you're standing inside the legend." Clara photographed every carving she could find. Many of the symbols resembled ancient languages from civilizations thousands of miles away. Some looked similar to Egyptian markings. Others resembled forgotten European runes, but none matched perfectly. It was as if the builders had created their own language entirely. Then Marcus discovered the skeletons. They lay scattered near the giant stone door. At least 12 human skeletons rested on the ground, all positioned facing the door as if they had died while worshipping it. Some wore rusted mining helmets from the early 20th century. Others appeared far older. Clara examined one carefully. "These remains could span hundreds of years," she said quietly. Benjamin suddenly called everyone over. He had found something partially buried beneath the dirt. Together they uncovered a rusted metal lantern beside an old leather journal. The cover had nearly rotted away, but the pages inside remained strangely preserved. Elias opened it carefully. The handwriting belonged to a man named Samuel Pike, dated 1894. Clara read aloud from the first page. "October 17th, 1894. We found the staircase after the explosion in the northern mine shaft. God forgive us for what we have uncovered." Silence filled the chamber. Clara continued reading. "The men are terrified. Strange sounds echo from deeper below at night. Thomas claims he saw figures moving in the dark beyond the stone door. I believe exhaustion has affected their minds, yet I confess I too hear whispers when the lanterns dim." Marcus shifted uneasily. "I do not like this." Clara turned another page. "October 21st. 2 miners vanished. No footprints, no signs of struggle. The remaining men refused to continue working. Last night we heard knocking from the other side of the stone door. 3 knocks exactly, repeated every hour until sunrise." Benjamin forced a laugh. "Probably cave pressure." Ruth looked at him with disgust. Clara kept reading while everyone listened silently. "October 24th. We attempted to leave the mine this morning but discovered the tunnel collapsed behind us. Some believe we are trapped intentionally. I now understand why the Cherokee feared this place. The symbols speak of watchers beneath the mountain. Elias took the journal from her hands. His expression darkened as he read the final entry. October 26th, 1894. The door opened to night. No more words followed. The remaining pages were blank, except for deep scratches across the paper. Marcus swallowed hard. That is it? Clara nodded slowly. Before anyone could respond, a loud metallic sound echoed through the chamber. Everyone froze. It came from the giant stone door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. Ruth stepped backward immediately. "We are leaving," she whispered. Another 3 knocks echoed from the other side of the door. Benjamin tried to speak calmly, but fear cracked his voice. "There must be another tunnel system." Elias raised his flashlight toward the door. "Who is there?" No answer came. Then the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath became visible in the cold air. Marcus gripped his pistol nervously. Clara noticed something moving across the carvings on the stone door. At first she thought it was water. Then she realized the symbols themselves were glowing faintly. Ruth grabbed Elias by the arm. "Sheriff, if you value your life, we leave now." The knocking stopped suddenly. Complete silence filled the chamber. Then came the whispering. Soft voices echoed from everywhere at once. Nobody could understand the words, but the sound crawled beneath their skin like insects. Marcus backed away in terror. Benjamin nearly dropped his flashlight. Clara felt her heartbeat racing as the whispers grew louder. Elias finally made his decision. "Everyone back to the stairs," he ordered firmly. The team retreated quickly across the chamber, but before they reached the staircase, Clara turned back one last time. She saw something standing near the stone door, a tall, shadowy figure motionless in the darkness. She blinked, and it vanished. They reached the surface by nightfall. Rain clouds gathered once more above the mountains, while darkness spread across Bryson Hollow. Elias ordered the cave sealed immediately until federal authorities could investigate. Heavy equipment blocked the staircase entrance while armed deputies guarded the site overnight, yet nobody in town slept peacefully. News of the underground chamber spread rapidly through Bryson Hollow. Older residents became visibly frightened. Some claimed the mountains had secrets never meant to be uncovered. Others remembered stories told by grandparents about missing settlers and cursed tunnels beneath the forest. Clara spent the night studying Samuel Pike's journal in her motel room. One passage disturbed her more than all the others. She had almost missed it hidden near the edge of a damaged page. It read, "The watchers are not buried here. They are waiting." Around midnight, Clara heard knocking at her motel door. 3 slow knocks. She froze instantly. When she opened the door, nobody stood outside. Only darkness and drifting mountain fog filled the empty parking lot. Then she looked down. Muddy footprints covered the ground outside her room. Bare, human footprints. They led away from the motel and disappeared into the forest beyond town. Clara did not sleep at all that night. The next morning, Sheriff Elias Boone received terrible news. One of the deputies guarding the cave entrance had vanished during the night. His flashlight and rifle were found abandoned beside the sealed staircase. Deep scratches covered the metal barricades, as though something had clawed at them from underneath. No footprints surrounded the site, except the deputies. The mountains remained silent. But something beneath them had awakened. And the deeper they searched for answers, the darker the truth became. By the 3rd day, federal officials arrived in Bryson Hollow. Black vehicles rolled into town before sunrise carrying archaeologists, military personnel, and intelligence agents. The townspeople watched nervously from their porches as strangers flooded the quiet mountain roads. Sheriff Elias Boone hated outsiders interfering in local matters, but even he knew the discovery beneath the Smoky Mountains had become far bigger than Bryson Hollow. Clara Whitmore stood near the cave entrance beside Benjamin Carter while workers removed the barricades. Armed soldiers surrounded the area now. Nobody was taking chances anymore. Deputy Marcus Hale looked exhausted. He had not spoken much since the whispers inside the chamber. "You think they found Deputy Nolan?" he asked quietly. Elias shook his head. No sign of him. Ruth Lawson arrived unexpectedly, carrying an old wooden box beneath her arm. She walked straight toward Clara without greeting anyone. "You need to see this," she said. Inside the box were dozens of yellowed papers and hand-drawn maps. Some looked over 100 years old. Clara examined one carefully and felt cold fear spread through her body. It showed a rough drawing of the same underground chamber they had discovered. Ruth pointed toward faded writing near the bottom. "My grandfather made these after meeting a dying miner back in 1895, she explained. "The man escaped whatever happened beneath the mountain." Clara's eyes widened. "Escaped?" Ruth nodded slowly. "Barely alive. He spent weeks rambling about shadows underground. Said something ancient lived beneath the Smokies long before people came here." Benjamin looked skeptical. "Stories change over time." Ruth ignored him completely. "The miner warned my grandfather never to let anyone dig too deep into the mountains again." Clara studied another paper. It contained strange symbols identical to those carved inside the chamber. Beneath them appeared a single sentence, written shakily in faded ink. "The watchers open the stone when the mountain bleeds." Clara looked toward the collapsed landslide above the cave entrance. The storm had literally torn the mountain open. Before she could say anything, shouting erupted near the staircase. Soldiers had entered the chamber earlier that morning. Now they were rushing back toward the surface, visibly terrified. One man collapsed near the entrance, gasping for breath. "Seal it again!" he screamed. "Seal the damn thing now!" Elias grabbed the soldier firmly. "What happened down there?" The man's face was pale with horror. "The door," he whispered. "It is open." Silence spread across the mountainside. Clara immediately pushed past the soldiers and headed toward the staircase, despite Elias shouting after her. Marcus and Benjamin followed reluctantly, while Ruth stayed behind, muttering prayers under her breath. The underground chamber felt different now. Colder, darker, more alive somehow. Clara noticed fresh marks covering the floor near the giant stone door. Long, dragging trails, as though something heavy had been moved across the chamber. Then they saw the door itself. It stood slightly open. Only a narrow gap separated the massive stone slabs, yet complete darkness waited beyond it. Marcus raised his flashlight toward the opening. The beam vanished into blackness. "How deep does that go?" he whispered. Benjamin crouched near the floor, examining strange stains beside the doorway. His expression changed instantly. "This is blood." Clara's heartbeat thundered inside her chest. She stepped closer to the opening, despite every instinct warning her not to. Cold air flowed from the darkness beyond, carrying a faint smell of earth and decay. Then she heard it again. Whispering. Soft voices rising from deep within the tunnel behind the door. Elias arrived moments later alongside several armed soldiers. "Nobody goes farther," he ordered immediately, but one of the federal archaeologists disagreed. Dr. Leonard Graves was a famous researcher known for controversial discoveries. He stared at the stone doorway with fascination rather than fear. "Do you understand what this means?" he said excitedly. "This structure predates every known civilization in North America." Elias glared at him. "And one of my deputies is missing." Graves barely listened. He stepped toward the opening with a flashlight and camera. "We may be looking at the greatest archaeological discovery in human history." Ruth Lawson suddenly appeared behind them. Nobody had seen her descend the staircase. Her face looked grim. or humanity's greatest mistake? Graves rolled his eyes impatiently. With respect, ma'am, mountain legends are not scientific evidence. Ruth stared directly at him. Neither is arrogance. Before anyone could stop him, Dr. Graves squeezed through the narrow opening in the stone door and disappeared into the darkness beyond. Clara shouted after him but received no response. Minutes passed in silence. Then came the screaming. Horrifying human screams echoed from deep within the tunnel. Soldiers rushed toward the doorway while Marcus nearly stumbled backward in terror. The screams stopped abruptly. Silence returned once more. Elias ordered 2 soldiers to retrieve Graves immediately. They entered cautiously with weapons drawn. Everyone waited anxiously beside the stone door. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. No sounds emerged from the darkness. Clara noticed Ruth trembling beside her. "What is it?" she asked softly. Ruth whispered without looking up. "It knows we are here now." Suddenly, one of the soldiers stumbled back through the doorway alone. Blood covered his uniform. His eyes were wild with terror. "Close it!" he gasped desperately. "Close the door!" Elias grabbed him. "Where is Dr. Graves?" The soldier shook uncontrollably. Something took him. Marcus backed away immediately. "We need to get out of here." But the wounded soldier continued rambling. "There are tunnels everywhere beneath the mountain. Old tunnels, endless tunnels. We found markings on the walls, thousands of them." He looked directly at Clara, and there were people down there. Everyone froze. "People," Clara repeated. The soldier nodded slowly. "Not dead, living people." The wounded soldier sat trembling against one of the stone pillars while medics rushed to stop the bleeding on his arm. His flashlight still flickered weakly in his shaking hand. Sheriff Elias Boone crouched beside him with growing frustration. "Slow down," Elias said firmly. "Tell us exactly what happened down there." The soldier swallowed hard. "We followed Dr. Graves through the tunnel behind the stone door. The passage kept going deeper beneath the mountain. The walls were covered in carvings and symbols. Some looked fresh." Clara Whitmore stared at him carefully. "Fresh?" The soldier nodded. "Like someone carved them, recently." Benjamin Carter crossed his arms nervously. "Maybe there are squatters living down there." Ruth Lawson let out a bitter laugh. "You still refuse to listen." The soldier continued speaking before anyone could argue. After about 15 minutes, we reached another chamber, bigger than this one. There were fires burning in stone bowls along the walls. Marcus Hale frowned. "Fires? Underground?" "Yes," the soldier whispered. "And there were people standing around them." Silence spread through the chamber once again. Elias looked skeptical. "Who were they?" The soldier stared blankly at the floor. "I do not know. They wore dark robes with strange markings painted on their faces. They just stood there watching us." Clara felt cold fear creeping through her chest. "Did they attack you?" "No," the soldier answered quietly. "Not at first." His breathing became faster. Dr. Graves tried speaking to them. He thought they were part of some hidden tribe. He kept asking questions. The soldier gripped Elias's arm suddenly. "Then the lights went out." Marcus cursed under his breath. "What do you mean the lights went out?" "All our flashlights died at the same time," the soldier whispered. Everything became completely dark. We could hear movement all around us. Then Dr. Graves started screaming. He looked toward the stone doorway, with horror in his eyes. Something grabbed him. Elias stood slowly. "What about the other soldier?" The wounded man shook his head. "I could hear him shooting, but I never saw what happened. Then the lights came back on for 1 second. His voice cracked badly. The people in robes were gone." Clara leaned closer. "And?" The soldier's face turned pale. There was something else standing there instead. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Even the dripping water inside the chamber seemed quieter now. Benjamin finally broke the silence. What did you see? The soldier opened his mouth, but no words came out. Fear consumed his expression completely. I cannot explain it, he whispered finally. It looked human and not human at the same time. Ruth Lawson closed her eyes, as if she already knew the answer. The Watchers, she murmured softly. Elias rubbed his forehead with frustration. Enough with these stories. But Clara noticed something disturbing. Elias no longer sounded confident. He sounded afraid. More soldiers arrived from the surface carrying stronger lights and heavy weapons. Federal officials argued quietly among themselves near the staircase. Some wanted the tunnels sealed immediately. Others insisted the discovery was too important to abandon. Dr. Leonard Graves was still missing somewhere beneath the mountain alongside another armed soldier. Elias eventually made his decision. We go down there one more time, he announced. Marcus stared at him like he had gone insane. Sheriff, did you not hear what this man just said? I heard him, Elias replied. But we are not leaving people trapped down there. Ruth stepped directly into his path. If you continue digging through those tunnels, more people will disappear. Elias looked at her tiredly. Then tell me what we are dealing with. Ruth hesitated for several moments. The old woman rarely looked uncertain, but now genuine fear filled her eyes. My grandmother used to tell stories passed down from Cherokee elders, she said quietly. Stories older than this town, older than the settlers. Maybe older than the tribes themselves. Clara listened carefully. What stories? Ruth glanced toward the dark tunnel behind the stone door. They spoke of people who lived beneath the mountains long ago. Not spirits, not demons, real people. Benjamin shook his head immediately. That is impossible. Ruth ignored him. According to the stories, these people worshipped something sleeping deep underground, something hidden inside the heart of the Smoky Mountains. Marcus frowned. What kind of thing? Ruth whispered carefully. Nobody knew. The stories only called it the Sleeper. A cold silence followed her words. Clara noticed even the soldiers nearby were listening now. Ruth continued slowly. The underground people believed the Sleeper would one day wake and reshape the world above. They built tunnels and chambers beneath the mountains for generations. She pointed toward the carvings surrounding them. These symbols were warnings. Benjamin laughed nervously. Warnings about what? Ruth looked directly at him. About digging too deep. Before anyone could respond, a loud metallic echo suddenly rolled through the tunnel behind the stone door. Everyone spun toward the darkness instantly. 3 knocks, slow, heavy, deliberate. The same knocking Samuel Pike described in his journal over 100 years earlier. Marcus stepped backward immediately. Nope, he muttered. Absolutely not. Another 3 knocks echoed from deeper underground. Clara felt goosebumps crawl across her arms. Then came the whispers again, faint voices rising through the tunnel like distant wind. Soldiers raised their weapons nervously, while several exchanged frightened looks. Elias forced himself to stay calm. Move carefully, he ordered. The rescue team entered the tunnel beyond the stone door, with flashlights cutting through the darkness. Clara followed closely beside Elias, while Marcus and Benjamin remained near the back. Ruth refused to enter, but warned them one last time before they disappeared underground. If you hear singing, she said quietly, run. The tunnel stretched endlessly beneath the mountain. Ancient symbols covered nearly every surface. Some carvings showed strange human figures kneeling before enormous shadowy shapes rising from the earth. Others depicted entire towns swallowed by darkness. Clara photographed everything despite the fear growing inside her. These carvings tell a story, she whispered. Benjamin examined one wall carefully. Looks more like a religion. The deeper they traveled, the warmer the air became strangely enough. Marcus noticed it too. Should underground tunnels get warmer? Benjamin shook his head slowly. Not naturally. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached another chamber, exactly as the wounded soldier described. Stone fire bowls lined the walls, though the flames were gone now. Massive pillars stretched upward into darkness, while narrow tunnels branched in every direction like veins beneath the earth. Clara noticed footprints covering the dusty floor, hundreds of them. Some looked recent. Elias crouched near one trail carefully. These are barefoot. Marcus scanned the shadows nervously. I feel like we are being watched. Before anyone answered, a weak voice echoed somewhere nearby. Help me. The team froze instantly. Dr. Graves! Clara shouted. Another weak cry answered from one of the side tunnels. Elias signaled the soldiers forward. They followed the sound carefully until they discovered Graves collapsed against the tunnel wall. His clothes were torn and dried blood covered one side of his face. He looked completely broken. Clara rushed toward him. Dr. Graves, what happened? Graves grabbed her arm desperately. We need to leave, he whispered. Right now. Elias frowned. Where is the missing soldier? Graves stared into the darkness behind them. Dead. Marcus swallowed hard. What killed him? Graves began shaking violently. They did. Clara helped him sit upright. Who? The historian's eyes filled with terror. The people down here. He struggled to breathe evenly. There are hundreds of them beneath the mountains. Benjamin stared in disbelief. That makes no sense. How could people survive underground for centuries? Graves laughed weakly. Because they never left. Silence followed his words. Clara noticed strange marks carved into Graves's skin around his wrists, symbols identical to those on the walls. Who did this to you? She asked softly. Graves looked horrified. They marked me. Elias narrowed his eyes. For what? Graves whispered one terrible answer. For the ceremony. Before anyone could question him further, distant singing suddenly echoed through the tunnels, soft human voices chanting somewhere deep underground. Ruth's warning flashed through Clara's mind instantly. If you hear singing, run. Graves panicked immediately. They are coming back. The chanting grew louder. Marcus aimed his flashlight down the nearest tunnel and nearly dropped it. Figures moved through the darkness ahead. Dozens of them. Tall, thin people wearing dark robes and white markings across their faces. None of them carried weapons. They simply walked slowly toward the rescue team while singing in a strange, ancient language. Elias raised his gun. Stop right there. The robed figures continued approaching silently. Clara noticed something terrifying about them. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beams strangely, almost like animals in the dark. Graves grabbed Elias desperately. Do not shoot. Why? Elias snapped. Graves looked close to tears. Because they are not the worst thing down here. The chanting suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the underground chamber. Then every robed figure dropped to their knees at the exact same moment. Clara's heart nearly stopped. Heavy footsteps echoed somewhere far deeper within the tunnels. Slow, massive. The ground trembled slightly beneath them. Benjamin stared into the darkness with wide eyes. What is that? Nobody answered him. The footsteps continued getting closer. One of the kneeling figures finally spoke in broken English. The sleeper wakes. Marcus backed away in terror. Sheriff, we need to leave now. Another tremor shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling above, while distant roaring echoed through the tunnels. It did not sound human. Clara looked toward the endless darkness beyond the kneeling figures and saw movement. Something enormous shifting far below the mountain. Then the lights died. Every flashlight went black at once. Complete darkness swallowed them. People began shouting in panic. Elias yelled for everyone to stay together, but his voice echoed helplessly through the chamber. Then Clara heard breathing directly beside her ear. A voice whispered softly from the darkness. "You should never have opened the mountain." Clara Whitmore screamed and stumbled backward through the darkness. Her shoulder slammed against cold stone, while panic exploded through the underground chamber. Around her, soldiers shouted desperately as boots scraped across the rocky floor. The chanting had stopped completely now. Only breathing, terrified breathing, filled the blackness beneath the mountain. Then the voice whispered again from somewhere close beside her. "The mountain remembers every wound." Clara reached blindly through the darkness, searching for her flashlight. Her fingers brushed against wet dirt and scattered stones. Suddenly a dim beam flickered nearby. Marcus Hale managed to force his flashlight back to life. Weak light spilled across the chamber, revealing chaos everywhere. Several soldiers had fallen while trying to retreat. Benjamin Carter stood frozen beside one of the pillars, staring toward the tunnels ahead. The robed figures were gone. Not a single one remained in sight. Elias Boone grabbed Clara's arm tightly. "Stay close!" Another tremor shook the ground beneath them. This one felt stronger. Dust poured from cracks in the ceiling, while distant roaring echoed through the tunnels once again. Dr. Leonard Graves looked completely broken now. Sweat covered his face, while his eyes darted wildly around the chamber. "It is moving," he whispered repeatedly. "God help us, it is moving." Marcus aimed his flashlight toward the darkness where the robed people had disappeared. "Sheriff," he said carefully, "tell me you heard that breathing." Nobody answered because they all heard it. Slow, heavy breathing echoed somewhere ahead, deep, wet, massive, like lungs the size of a building inhaling beneath the earth itself. Benjamin finally found his voice. "This cannot be real." Ruth Lawson's warning suddenly echoed inside Clara's mind again. "If you hear singing, run." They should have listened to her. Another flashlight came back on, then another. The chamber brightened slightly, though large shadows still swallowed most of the underground space. Elias looked toward the side tunnel where the breathing echoed. "We leave now," he ordered firmly. Nobody argued this time. The group began retreating carefully toward the main tunnel leading back to the stone door. But before they could move far, one of the soldiers near the rear shouted in alarm. Something moved. Marcus swung his flashlight toward the darkness instantly. At first, Clara saw nothing, then she noticed a shape standing motionless between two stone pillars at the far end of the chamber. A person, tall and thin, watching them silently. Elias raised his weapon. "Who are you?" The figure did not respond. Marcus stepped closer with the flashlight beam fixed directly on it. Clara's stomach twisted with horror. The figure was human, but something about it looked terribly wrong. Its skin appeared pale gray beneath the light. Long black veins spread across its neck and face like cracks in old stone. Its eyes reflected bright white. Dr. Graves began shaking violently. "That is one of them," he whispered. "One of the marked." The figure tilted its head slowly while staring at the group. Then it smiled. The smile stretched far too wide across its face. Marcus cursed quietly under his breath. "Nope." Suddenly the figure darted sideways into darkness with unnatural speed. Soldiers immediately aimed their rifles into the shadows. "Did you see how fast it moved?" Benjamin whispered. Another shape appeared behind them. Then another. Pale figures watched silently from the tunnels surrounding the chamber. None of them spoke. None attacked. They simply observed. Clara counted at least 12 before losing track. Elias tightened his grip on his gun. "Keep moving," he ordered quietly. The group backed slowly toward the exit tunnel while the pale figures followed from a distance. Their bare feet made almost no sound against the stone floor. Clara noticed markings carved into their skin, identical to the symbols covering the underground walls. "Who are these people?" she whispered to Graves. The historian swallowed hard before answering. "Descendants." "Descendants of who?" Graves looked terrified. "The ones who built this place." Another tremor shook the chamber violently. This time a loud cracking sound echoed somewhere deep below. The pale figures immediately stopped moving. Fear spread across their faces. One of them whispered something in a strange language before all of them suddenly fled into the darkness at once. Marcus blinked in confusion. Why are they running? Then came the roar. It exploded through the tunnels like thunder beneath the earth. Clara nearly collapsed from the sound alone. Soldiers covered their ears while dust cascaded from the ceiling above. The roar did not sound like any animal Clara had ever heard. It sounded ancient, furious, hungry. Graves looked ready to faint. "It knows we are here." Elias grabbed him firmly. "Move!" The group rushed through the tunnel as another deafening roar shook the underground world around them. Clara's lungs burned while they sprinted through the ancient passageways. Behind them came heavy impacts echoing through the stone. Boom, boom, boom. Something massive was moving beneath the mountain. Marcus glanced backward while running. "Faster!" he shouted. "It is coming." Benjamin nearly slipped on loose rocks, but Clara caught his arm before he fell. The tunnel ahead curved sharply, while their flashlight beams bounced wildly against the walls. Strange symbols flashed across the stone around them. Some carvings now seemed disturbingly clear. Giant black shapes rising from underground, while tiny human figures knelt before them in worship. Clara realized with growing horror that these were not myths. The builders of this place had been documenting something real. Another roar thundered behind them, closer this time. One soldier panicked and fired his rifle into the darkness. The gunshots echoed violently through the tunnels. Elias spun around furiously. "Stop shooting!" But the soldier ignored him. "I saw something." Then the soldier screamed. Clara turned just in time to see him vanish into the darkness sideways, as though yanked violently by invisible hands. His flashlight spun across the tunnel floor before smashing against the wall. Blood splattered across the stone. Marcus shouted in terror. Benjamin nearly froze completely. Elias grabbed him hard. "Keep moving!" More screams echoed behind them now, not human screams. The pale underground people were shrieking somewhere in the darkness. Their cries sounded terrified. Whatever moved beneath the mountain frightened them too. Clara's heartbeat pounded painfully while they ran toward the distant glow of the main chamber ahead. The giant stone door finally appeared through the darkness. Relief flooded through the group instantly, but the chamber beyond no longer looked empty. The robed figures stood waiting around the stone doorway. Dozens of them. Men, women, and even children. All kneeling silently with heads lowered toward the tunnel Clara's group had just escaped. Ruth Lawson stood near the staircase entrance holding an old lantern. She looked horrified when she saw them running. "What did you do?" she shouted. Another earth-shaking impact answered her question. The stone floor cracked loudly behind the group. Elias pushed Clara toward the staircase. "Get out!" The kneeling robed figures suddenly began chanting again. Their voices rose together through the chamber in a low rhythmic song. Clara stopped briefly near one of them. The woman kneeling on the floor looked old and sickly, with white markings painted across her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks while she chanted. "What are they saying?" Clara asked Ruth quickly. Ruth's expression darkened. "They are praying for forgiveness." Then something emerged from the tunnel. At first, Clara only saw darkness moving unnaturally within the passage. Then a giant pale hand slammed against the tunnel wall with enough force to crack solid stone. Marcus shouted in horror. The creature pulled itself partially into the chamber. Clara felt her mind struggle to understand what she was seeing. The thing resembled a human shape stretched into something monstrous. Its skin looked gray and wet, like flesh buried underground for centuries. Long arms ended in black claw-like fingers. Its face remained mostly hidden in shadow, except for two glowing white eyes, large enough to reflect across the chamber walls. The creature's mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The smell hit them instantly. Rotting earth and decay so powerful, Clara nearly vomited. Several soldiers opened fire immediately. Bullets slammed into the creature's body, but seemed to do almost nothing. The monster roared so loudly, the chamber trembled around them. One of the robed people suddenly stepped forward and raised both arms toward the creature. He began speaking rapidly in the strange underground language. For one brief moment, the creature stopped moving. Then it grabbed the man instantly. Clara screamed as the pale figure vanished into the creature's mouth. Blood sprayed across the chamber floor. Chaos erupted. The robed people scattered in every direction, shrieking with terror. Soldiers fired wildly, while Elias forced Clara toward the staircase. Benjamin stood frozen, staring at the monster like his mind had broken completely. Marcus tackled him just as one enormous claw smashed into the stone beside them. The impact shattered an entire pillar. "Move!" Marcus screamed. The group sprinted toward the stairs while the creature dragged itself farther into the chamber behind them. Clara glanced back once and wished she had not. More shapes moved within the tunnel beyond the monster, smaller creatures crawling through the darkness behind it. There were many of them. Ruth Lawson grabbed Clara's arm halfway up the staircase. The stories were true. Ruth whispered in horror. Another roar echoed beneath the mountain while the staircase shook violently. Above them, daylight finally appeared at the cave entrance. Soldiers near the surface shouted in confusion as Elias and the others burst from underground, covered in dust and blood. Clara collapsed onto the wet mountain ground, gasping for breath. Behind them, the earth suddenly trembled harder than before. Cracks spread across the mountainside, while birds exploded from the surrounding trees. Then the scream came, not from the creature below, from the mountain itself. A deep, terrible sound echoed through the Smoky Mountains like the earth crying out in pain. Every person on the mountain froze. Ruth Lawson stared toward the forest with terror unlike anything Clara had ever seen. "It is waking up," Ruth whispered. Then all across the mountains surrounding Bryson Hollow, hidden beneath the trees and mist, ancient stone doors slowly began to open. The mountains erupted into chaos before sunset. Emergency sirens screamed across Bryson Hollow, while terrified residents flooded the streets, searching for answers. News helicopters circled above the forests, broadcasting live images of the collapsing mountainsides. Across the Smoky Mountains, hidden cave entrances had begun appearing after the tremors. Some opened deep inside the forests, others split apart near old roads and abandoned mining tunnels. Everywhere, the same ancient stone doorways emerged from beneath the earth. Sheriff Elias Boone stood near the command center outside Bryson Hollow Elementary School, watching military trucks race toward the mountains. His hand still trembled slightly from what he had seen underground. Clara Whitmore sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, though she barely noticed the cold. Her mind remained trapped inside that chamber beneath the mountain. The creature's glowing eyes still haunted her. Marcus Hale, paced beside the emergency tents nervously. "People are already posting videos online," he muttered. "Half the country thinks this is some government experiment." Benjamin Carter looked worse every passing hour. He had not spoken much since escaping the tunnels. Dirt and blood still stained his clothes, while his eyes stayed fixed on the distant mountains. Ruth Lawson sat alone beneath a tree, whispering prayers quietly to herself. Suddenly, one of the federal agents rushed toward Elias carrying a tablet. "Sheriff, you need to see this." The man showed him several shaky videos recorded by terrified hikers earlier that afternoon. Clara moved closer to watch. The footage showed pale figures emerging from cave entrances deep in the forest. Men, women, and children with strange markings carved into their skin. Some appeared frightened and confused by the sunlight. Others simply stared silently at the cameras before disappearing back underground. "They are everywhere," the agent said grimly. "We counted at least 12 separate tunnel systems opening across the mountains." Marcus cursed under his breath. "How many of those things are living down there?" Ruth finally spoke from beneath the tree. "More than you can imagine." Elias turned toward her immediately. "You know something else." Ruth hesitated for several seconds before answering. "My grandmother once told me the underground people were not prisoners." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Ruth stared toward the Smoky Mountains darkening beneath the evening sky. "They stayed underground by choice." Silence followed her words. Benjamin finally looked up. "Nobody would choose that life." Ruth shook her head slowly. "Not unless they believed the surface world was dangerous." Clara stepped closer carefully. "Dangerous from what?" Ruth's tired eyes met hers. "From what sleeps below." Before Clara could ask another question, shouting erupted near the edge of town. Several police vehicles sped past the school toward Main Street. Elias immediately grabbed his radio. "What happened?" Static crackled briefly before a deputy answered breathlessly. "We found one of them inside town." Elias rushed toward his truck, while Clara, Marcus, and Benjamin followed close behind. The streets of Bryson Hollow looked completely different now. Fear hung over the town like smoke. Store owners boarded windows while families loaded belongings into vehicles trying to leave. Sirens echoed endlessly between the mountain ridges. They arrived outside St. Jude's Church, where deputies surrounded the building with rifles raised. Father Brennan stood near the entrance, pale with shock. Elias approached quickly. "What is going on?" The priest swallowed hard. "A child came into the church about 20 minutes ago." Clara frowned. "A child?" Father Brennan nodded slowly. "One of the underground people." Marcus exchanged nervous glances with Benjamin. Elias pushed through the church doors cautiously, while deputies followed behind. Inside, candlelight flickered softly across the empty pews. Near the altar sat a little girl no older than 10. Her long black hair hung across a pale face marked with strange white symbols. She wore dark robes similar to the underground people in the tunnels. Yet she looked completely human, frightened even. Clara felt her fear ease slightly as she approached. The girl looked up silently with large gray eyes. "Do you speak English?" Clara asked gently. After several seconds, the child nodded once. Elias kept his distance. "What is your name?" The girl answered quietly. "Lydia." Marcus frowned. "That is an ordinary name." Ruth Lawson suddenly appeared behind them. Nobody saw her enter the church. The old woman stared at the child with sadness rather than fear. "They were ordinary people once," Ruth said softly. Lydia's eyes widened when she saw Ruth. "You know the stories," the child whispered. Ruth nodded. "My family remembered." Clara knelt carefully beside the girl. "Why did you come here?" Lydia looked toward the church windows nervously. "Because it is waking." The room fell silent again. Clara spoke gently. "What is waking?" Tears filled the child's eyes instantly. The first one. Marcus rubbed his face anxiously. "Can someone please start making sense?" Lydia looked directly at him. "The mountain people kept it sleeping for generations. That was our purpose." Clara felt cold dread spreading through her chest. The underground people were guarding the creatures? Lydia nodded slowly. Not guarding. Feeding. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Elias finally spoke in disbelief. "Feeding them what?" The little girl lowered her head. "Us." The church became deathly silent. Clara stared at the child, unable to speak. Marcus backed away slightly while Benjamin looked physically ill. Ruth closed her eyes painfully, as though she feared this answer all along. Lydia continued quietly. "Long ago, our ancestors discovered the first one beneath the mountains. It was already ancient then, older than history, older than memory." Her voice trembled badly. "It could not die. It only slept." Clara struggled to process the words. "And your people stayed underground, feeding it?" "Yes," Lydia whispered. "If it became hungry, it woke." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane." But deep inside, Clara knew the child was telling the truth. She remembered the creature's enormous pale form dragging itself from the tunnel. That thing was no myth. Lydia looked toward the church doors suddenly. Fear returned to her face instantly. "They found me." Elias frowned. "Who found you?" The answer came moments later. Screaming erupted outside. Gunshots exploded through the evening air, followed by terrified shouting. Deputies burst into the church frantically. "Sheriff!" one yelled. "Creatures in the streets!" Elias drew his weapon immediately, while Marcus ran toward the entrance. Clara grabbed Lydia protectively. Outside, Bryson Hollow had descended into nightmare. Pale creatures sprinted through the streets with horrifying speed. Some resembled the monster from the chamber, though smaller and thinner. Others looked almost human except for glowing eyes and twisted limbs. People ran screaming between abandoned cars, while deputies fired desperately into the chaos. One creature slammed through a store window, dragging a man into darkness before anyone could react. Another crawled across rooftops with unnatural movements. Benjamin stared in horror. "There are too many." Ruth grabbed Clara's arms suddenly. "This is only the beginning." A deafening roar echoed from the mountains behind town. Every creature instantly stopped moving. Silence spread across Bryson Hollow for one terrifying moment. Then all the creatures turned toward the Smoky Mountains together, as if listening to a distant command. Lydia began crying softly. "It is calling them." The creatures immediately fled toward the forests surrounding town. Within seconds, they vanished into the darkness beneath the trees. Sirens continued echoing while smoke rose from damaged buildings. People cried openly in the streets. Elias lowered his gun slowly. "What the hell is happening?" Lydia looked toward the mountains with horror. "The first one is gathering its children." Clara stared at the dark mountain ridges looming over Bryson Hollow. She suddenly understood something terrible. The underground people had not built those tunnels to worship the creatures. They built them to contain them, and now the containment had failed. Later that night, the town gathered inside the school gymnasium under military protection. Hundreds of frightened residents filled the room while news reports played across giant screens. Similar attacks were now happening throughout the Smoky Mountain region. Entire hiking groups had vanished. Remote cabins were found abandoned with doors torn apart from the inside. Some videos showed enormous shapes moving beneath the forests at night. Federal authorities declared a state of emergency across eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. Yet nobody truly understood what they were facing. Clara sat beside Lydia near the back of the gym. The little girl remained silent for hours before finally whispering something unexpected. The first one was not alone. Clara turned toward her instantly. "What?" Lydia stared down at her hands. There are others sleeping deeper below. Clara felt ice spread through her veins. "How many?" Lydia slowly looked up. "Nobody knows." Before Clara could respond, every light inside the gym suddenly flickered. People gasped nervously while soldiers raised their weapons. Then the power died completely. Darkness swallowed the crowded room. Children screamed while panic spread instantly through the building. Emergency lights finally activated seconds later, bathing the gym in dim red illumination. Clara looked around quickly, searching for Lydia. The little girl was gone. "Lydia!" Clara shouted. No answer came. Then someone near the gym entrance began screaming. Soldiers rushed toward the doors, while terrified townspeople pushed backward. Clara forced her way through the crowd until she finally saw why everyone was panicking. Written across the locked gymnasium doors in dripping black letters were 5 simple words. "The mountain wants you back." Panic consumed the gymnasium as soldiers forced everyone away from the doors. Children cried while terrified families huddled together beneath the red emergency lights. Sheriff Elias Boone stared at the black words dripping across the entrance with cold disbelief. Clara Whitmore searched desperately through the crowd for Lydia, but the little girl had vanished completely. It was as if she had never been there at all. Then the mountain roared again. The sound rolled across Bryson Hollow like thunder from beneath the earth itself. Outside, every dog in town began barking at once. Car alarms screamed in the distance. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Ruth Lawson slowly stood near the center of the gym. Her tired eyes moved across the frightened crowd. "Listen to me carefully," she said loudly. "The underground people spent generations keeping those creatures asleep beneath the Smoky Mountains, but we broke the seal when we opened the tunnels." Silence filled the room. Even the crying stopped. Clara looked toward the dark windows where endless forests surrounded the town. Somewhere beneath those mountains, ancient things were waking. Things older than history itself. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. "Can they be stopped?" Ruth hesitated before answering quietly. "Maybe." Before anyone could ask how, every emergency light suddenly shut off again. Complete darkness swallowed the gymnasium. Then came the whispers. Hundreds of soft voices echoing from outside the building. The same whispers Clara heard beneath the mountain. And slowly, all around the school, came 3 heavy knocks. Boom, 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 not on the doors, beneath the ground. Clara realized with horror that the creatures were no longer hiding underground. They were surrounding the town, waiting, watching. And somewhere deep beneath the Smoky Mountains, something ancient had finally awakened. If you enjoyed tonight's dark mystery, subscribe to Dark Lantern Story. And leave a like for more forgotten legends, terrifying discoveries, and untold historical nightmares. And before you go, tell us in the comments, would you dare enter the tunnels beneath the Smoky Mountains?